I am Brother Cornell West.
This is Chris Hedges.
I'm Rosa Clemente.
Hey, what's up? This is Chuck D, Public Enemy, Prophets of Rage.
And this is Newsbeat.
Yes, y'all. Peace and love. It's your man, Manny Faces, rocking from an undisclosed location somewhere in the deep south of the United States, representing for the Newsbeat crew. We got our partners in crime coming on. This is This Week in Social Justice, presented by Newsbeat Podcast every Friday. Well, not every Friday. We'll talk about that more. Fridays live at 1 p.m. on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. Again, This Week in Social Justice. I'm Manny Faces, the producer, audio editor, and host of the Newsbeat Podcast, where we mix high-level, hard-hitting journalism, social justice journalism, with music and very often original hip-hop. It's a very interesting mix. It's an award-winning mix, and I cannot do it alone. I do it with my compadres who are here today, as always. Mr. Rashad Mian, the managing editor of Newsbeat and This Week in Social Justice as well, and Christopher Twarski. We don't know where you are, Ski. What's up, brother? How are you, sir? Editor-in-chief.
I'm right here.
That's what's up, gentlemen.
How's your undisclosed location, Manny?
My undisclosed location is fantastic. I got out of Dodge in the Northeast, just skirting the forward lip of the wonderful snowstorm that you guys are ensconced in right now. I got on the road and headed down to Georgia. I am in Georgia. I decided to come down to where the action is, politically speaking. So down here visiting some of the Faces fam, safely potted up down here in Georgia. So yeah, down here, man.
Awesome, man. Enjoy it.
Yeah, man. It's good times. Good times.
Have you seen those lawn signs all over the place yet?
There were some lawn signs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's campaign season still.
A lot of the neighborhoods we passed through that were kind of residential favored the Republican side, but as we know from past episodes of This Week in Social Justice, Georgia is a very, very interesting place politically right now. So shouts to everyone down here in Georgia doing the good work to forward the ideals of democracy down here.
Definitely.
I'll be looking into it a little bit while I'm down here. Quiet as kept. I'll be reporting from the.
You'll be reporting live.
Reporting live to you from Georgia. Yeah. So that's it. So here we are.
Expect daily dispatches on the podcast feed.
Oh, I should do that. We should do that. So this is This Week in Social Justice, and we might even talk about Georgia this week. Gentlemen, we have a great show. We have a great guest, as always. We do this very I'm a little haphazard. I don't have my normal setup, and you know that I conduct behind the scenes all the screen switches and all that jazz. So bear with me, and if I mess something up, don't laugh at me. Rashad, our guest today, who will be here very shortly, set him up.
Yeah, definitely. We have Tauhid Chappell joining us. He works for the News Voices Philadelphia program at Free Press, which is a press advocacy group, but they also work to to support greater engagement between communities and the media. So we're going to have a really interesting topic. He kickstarted a discussion recently about defunding the typical crime beat that you see in most newsrooms. It's a piece that he co-wrote for Neiman Lab, so that should be a fun and interesting conversation.
Absolutely. As former journalists, no, as actual journalists that has some experience covering local crime beats, this will be an interesting conversation, and it's a dope perspective that we just definitely want to take part in. So we'll do that in a few moments. As always, let's start off with our question of the day. Shouts to you if you're watching live on YouTube or Twitch or Facebook. We appreciate you. We want to make sure that we take your thoughts into consideration. The question of the day, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well, is something we've talked about in the past. Should incarcerated people, folks that are incarcerated, be prioritized during the COVID-19 vaccine rollout? Please answer the questions, your thoughts. We'd love to share your thoughts. Prioritization for incarcerated folk who have been actually, as we've talked about, and we might get into a little bit in a minute, have been very hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic behind bars. And although incarcerated, should be should be treated no less humanely. That's the question of the day. You guys give comments. We will come back. I didn't even do the fancy thing. I told you I'm a little discombobulated. That is our...
There it
So
is.
you still got it. You still got it, even from Newark to Jersey.
Doesn't matter where you are.
Listen, man, I'm trying to do my thing. Internet may be crazy. I'm not in my home base, so bear with me. So that all being said, please answer the question of the day in the comment section. If you're listening live, if you're listening on the repeat, come join us Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern time for This Week in Social Justice Live. We will probably be off for the next 2 Fridays. As it is Christmas and New Year's, and people are doing things. We'll be back at the top of the year, I do suspect, with some great amounts of coverage on some of these issues. So, moving along, our news beat bites, baby. Oh, what's happening here is that I'll go first, right? I picked this up at the last minute, so bear with me once again. My news beat
something local too.
I do have something local. While I'm in Georgia, I want to also point out one of the stories that I've been following and passing along. As we talked about COVID-19 ravaging jails and prisons throughout the land, having spoken to Dr. Homer Venters and other experts on it for other episodes of Newsbeat, Georgia has been particularly front and center of this situation. WGXA in Georgia has investigated shocking conditions in some Georgia prisons during the pandemic. Again, I want to point this out because I think that as we talk about marginalized communities getting obviously being victimized even more by the coronavirus pandemic, we see it happening a lot in the jails and prisons, which we predicted. We helped predict when we had Dr. Venters on a special episode back in March. Back in March, we said this was going to be a problem. Georgia is really receiving some attention in a negative way for non-compliance with CDC COVID-19 guidelines, inhumane conditions, non-COVID positive inmates being put in the same area as COVID positive inmates, PPE not being available. Conditions are very bad. Telfair State Prison, I have a very good friend who's been incarcerated there for some time, and he has been telling me from the Institute about dispatches from the field that all of this is accurate. There may be some prisoner-led class action lawsuits in the mix. So I just wanted to point this out. We obviously have to pay attention to this. WGXA News is investigating this issue, and I wanted to pass it along as something that we should always pay attention to, especially because I'm here and I know someone that is personally being affected, and it is as bad as you think it is. So that's my news bite of the day.
Yeah. Well, mine's going to go international for viewers and listeners. As you know, we like to shine a light on human rights, civil liberties, and social justice, not just in the U.S., but around the world. And I came across this report. It was published yesterday by the nonprofit Center for Global Policy, and it's just the latest in a really horrific. It's a new horrific chapter in something that's been going on since 2016, and basically China is now forcing hundreds of thousands of the Muslim minority Uyghurs in the Xinjiang province to pick cotton. And, this is just the latest in what has been more and more reports of oppression and repression and cultural genocide against the Uyghurs in China since 2016. Another sort of side story ongoing with them is the imprisonment of hundreds of thousands of them in re-education internment camps throughout the country. And also, reports are coming out of the forced sterilization of tens of thousands of Uyghur women. So,
right,
that's just one thing to another.
Sorry, it's just an issue that I doesn't get the press I feel it deserves, and I wanted to just share that report. And
that report was from again the
nonprofit Center for Global Policy.
Right. I think we're putting some of these links in the comment section. So if you guys want to learn more about this, there's a little bit inside baseball, but if you're just hearing about this for the first time, it's an enormous issue and one that, really the world should be paying closer attention to. So we appreciate that information, Chris. Rashed, what you got?
I'm up next. So I'm sort of on the same length as you, Manny. So the Prison Policy Initiative released a report this week highlighting sort of community spread due to infections inside prisons of COVID-19. As you mentioned, this is something that's been warned about for a long time prior to the pandemic, just ballooning to the terrible situation it is right now. And what this report shows, and it also, I think the good things that it's doing is it's shining a light on the importance of containing the spread of coronavirus inside these facilities, because even though it's important to protect the people that are in there, but it's also the virus gets out. It doesn't just stay sealed and trapped inside a jail or a prison. And they're showing that places, rural communities with high concentrations of inmates, that those communities are seeing more of a spread of COVID-19 in their area. So again, it shines light both on the situation inside these jails and prisons, but also what's happening outside. Like I said, it's not contained. And I think it deals with sort of the question of the day that we put in there. Should incarcerated populations be prioritized when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccine? And I think for some people, the answer is yes, due to the fact that the spread inside these facilities is much greater than that of the general population.
Right. That's interesting. And it says here, and you mentioned that in non-metro counties where more people are incarcerated, caseloads grew more quickly. There's a correlation here between. So it's not like even if you were a cold-hearted snake and you were like, forget them, they're prisoners, they should not come, they should be last. Well, you got to understand. I mean, a good friend of mine. First of all, that's stupid. But a good friend of mine, for example, has a partner who is a nurse in an ICE facility, and you know what I mean. Like, these people work in the community, so you are helping, community spread. Just like the healthcare workers should be frontline. There's a lot of people that should be frontline, especially in areas that are being ravaged, as we talked about in Georgia, et cetera, et cetera. So disproportionately so. I mean, it just makes sense from a logistical stand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and even prisons have aging populations, and they have lax healthcare. So people who are in there for a long time because of long sentencing that we put in place in the 80s and 90s, those people are susceptible to this disease inside there. And obviously, the corrections officers, as you mentioned, staff, they go in and out, so the virus spreads.
All right. Well, once again, thank you for that, Rashed and Chris. That rounds out these news beat bites. These are just small tidbits of information you might not see on your leading their hourly cable news, roundups that are very focused on like 2 issues. So we try to do what we can. These are our news beat. And once again, please answer our question of the day. Should incarcerated people be prioritized during the COVID-19 vaccine rollout? Please answer in your comments in the comments section of wherever you're looking. By the way, you might be listening on the podcast feed or listening on the replay. That's fine. You don't get to play along. But do remember, Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern at the top of the year. As we round out this year, that's been a hell of a decade. We'll be back doing this weekly. So we want you to stick around. With that,
I hear there'll be a new president. So,
well, rumor has it. I'm in Georgia. You ask some 10 people, you might get different answers right where I'm at, brother.
Right.
All right. So once again, that's it. Let's keep on going. We have a guest who in the groom room just agreed. Rashed, introduce our guest, would you please, sir? As we, remember, I'm not at home. But hold on, no, I got to do the thing.
Oh yeah, do the thing.
I'm trying to do the thing.
I know that you're not at home, but I
know. Listen, we got to make sure we do it properly.
Capabilities.
All right, go ahead. Set it up. Let's go.
All right, we're inviting on the show to Tauhid Chappell. Again, as I mentioned, from the News Voices Philadelphia program manager, and that's with the group Free Press. Tauhid, thanks for coming on. Oh, you're still muted.
You'd think I would know by this time.
Look, I don't know if you've done many Zoom things this year. That's how it goes.
It's a rookie mistake that continues to come up, just like all the time. You think you're talking, and then you're actually not. But thank you for having me, everyone.
Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on, especially the last minute. I caught this article that you co-wrote. I saw it on Twitter because it was gaining some steam. It brought up an interesting conversation, and I immediately slacked these 2 guys, and I said we need to get these guys on to talk about this issue. So we really appreciate it. So let's start there. So the piece for Neiman Lab is called Defund the Crime Beat. So just explain the premise and why you think it's important.
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity, the platform to talk a little bit more about Free Press. For those who are tuning in and don't know anything about Free Press is a media policy and media advocacy organization. Originally, it originated from Massachusetts, but we also have I guess, an office in DC, and we also have projects that are happening in New Jersey, Charlotte, Colorado, and Philadelphia, where I'm going to be working at. Free Press works and advocates for a couple of things, and one of them is really related to the work that I'm doing. It advocates for broadband and internet access for all, which we know is even now more critical than ever before. It fights to break up media conglomerations because we know there's a monopoly on media. It fights for protections around government and police surveillance, and we know surveillance is a huge thing as well. Mm-hmm. And the last thing that it really fights for is for transforming journalism and media equity. And this is kind of the part that I play in the News Voices team, which is the journalism arm of Free Press. The Defund the Crime Beat is really a lot of the work that Free Press has been doing even before I was hired this year, and I've only been here for 6 months. But the work that comes out of this op-ed really is a culmination of work that Free Press has been doing on the ground in various communities, both in Philly and outside of Philly, where they've been hosting community listening sessions to understand how can journalism do better. Right? I've worked in the media for almost a decade now. I've worked in local broadcast TV for 4 years. I've worked at top places like the Washington Post for 2 years. And then most recently, a local regional newspaper, the Philadelphia Inquirer. And, you know, the one thing that has not really been emphasized in any newsroom, really never supported or resources allocated, is community engagement and community outreach. And one thing that, you know, if this had been prioritized and invested in, newsrooms would have known well before any of the uprisings had come. For decades, mm-hmm. They would have known that the crime beat sucks, that covering crime really sucks. And then the fact is that the proof is in the research, right? And in the Defund piece for Neiman Lab, we have various and multiple citations of various research, especially within the first 4 links, that show how harmful crime reporting is, and not how harmful it is just in terms of showing, disproportionately showing Black communities as being the brunt of police violence and state-sanctioned violence, but also Crime Beat is really just destroying and diminishing the trust that Black and brown communities have with journalists. And primarily newsrooms to this day are still white-owned and they're white majority. And so in a place like Philly, when you have a 44% Black population and yet your local news is not really reflecting the community at large, there is, as I'm sure you know and your listeners know, there's a distortion of media. And around crime as well, it's very easy to tell how TV news and how, local print and digital news covers shootings in Black neighborhoods versus a stabbing that happens in a highly populated, rich white area as well. So there's the distortion of coverage. And over decades and decades and decades, this type of distortion of coverage, really painting a bad image on Black and brown communities, has just led a lot of Black community members to give up on local news. Why should we trust journalists when they come in asking us all these questions about trauma and shooting when they've never even reached out to us to ask us what we want? And so Free Press has done a bunch of community outreach, a bunch of community engagement listening sessions. And overall, they've heard from multiple communities. And my boss, Mike, has been doing this for more than a decade. They've heard from multiple communities that crime coverage is problematic. Crime coverage does not actually keep us safe. And the way that journalists report crime does not keep us informed on how we can address these problems and what are the solutions that are currently happening. So this, this piece is really just a frustration, I guess, on my end to say that we have documentation that this hasn't been working for generations. We have the Kerner Commission, which has been released for more than 50 years, that shows that journalists have been screwing up race relations with community members and the media industry for decades. So it's really just saying, listen, if all of this research is out there, if all this community feedback is out there, and it's all documented, then why hasn't the industry changed? And what can we be doing to actually change how we cover policing in the criminal legal system so that actually not only informs Black and brown communities, but keeps them safe and actually keeps them healthy and alive? So that's the premise.
Yeah, I mean, just before you came on, and Rashad and I have covered crime whenever that wasn't just our beat, but obviously, if you're in journalism, you probably covered crime at some point. And, I just think that your piece brings up it's such a critical conversation to have, I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail, just just for listeners and viewers who haven't covered crime, and you brought up sort of these relationships and how a crime beat reporter can look the other way, or a lot of their coverage could be dictated just on their access to the sources, right? And sort of that that reporter source relationship. If they burn their source, they maybe think they'll get blocked out on the last thing, right? So can you just explain to people how it's
will fall? So obviously journalists have different approaches with how they cover crime. I've had to call a couple PIOs, public information officers, in my time, both as a digital producer and a social media producer, to understand if there's like a breaking news situation. But normally, typically, what happens is that if a shooting happens, if any sort of officer involved, in language here and terminology here is important, what they like to say is officer involved shooting happens, journalists usually call police departments immediately to try to get as much information as possible. That is their direct access. Police, and you have to give them credit in a way, police do a really good job at public relations. They do a really good job at reaching out to journalists, keeping them informed on what their activities, and cultivating those relationships with journalists. And when you have police departments that, one, are very well funded, two, have resources, and three, are able to create these relationships with journalists, relationships matter in the media industry. We are an information economy, right? So when a journalist calls a police officer, mostly a public information officer, they're going to get a certain amount of information back. But the problem is, and again, we cite this in our Neiman Lab article, we know that the police historically lie. We know that historically police departments are terrible at being held accountable. They distort their own information, and they outright lie, and they share propaganda to kind of distort the truth. When we hear officer-involved shooting, we often don't even hear or see in our media that usually officers are the reasons why that there's a shooting involved in the first place. And so that relationship, when a breaking news situation happens between a civilian or a person and an officer, journalists will definitely reach out to police departments first, and they have a better relationship with them. So they get more information first. They are able to write that story really quickly, be first, so to speak, because journalists and media outlets love being first, and they are able to get that news out really quickly to their audience and show that, hey, we have the inside information, we know what's going on, and we have the closest relationship to the people impacted to be able to tell this story. Well, most of the cases, journalists do not have really good relationships with neighborhoods and community members who are actually impacted by police violence, right? So you only end up, and many times we still see this too, especially in the Philadelphia media ecosystem, you still see reports of any sort of like crime or violence involving police. A lot of police sources will be quoted, but no one from the community is quoted. No one who's actually in that neighborhood block or that community organization or that local community center that helps families that are dealing with violence, they're often not quoted. And when you have that kind of not only misrepresentation, but really an erasure of a community perspective and a community expertise, you're only telling one side of the story. And that's been going on for generations and generations and generations. And now all of you know, when the public and when readers and news consumers only see one kind of the story, there's a perception that's created. There are stereotypes that are created. There's misinformation that's created that makes, police are always going to this one, neighborhood because there's all these guns and drugs and all that. And, Black people are contributing to this. Why can't they just figure things out? You get these types of, I still hear these commentaries still too. So to wrap this around, it comes down to one of the most important things is sourcing. And when journalists do not have a good, reliable relationship with community members that are impacted by over-policing, you're only going to get one side of the story. And you really need to scrutinize that when you read that.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought up the police-involved shooting aspect of it too, just the language that's used, because I think we could use Breonna Taylor as a prime example. When she was killed, the first articles that came out made it just seem like a mundane investigation that led to a shooting, and it was framed as if the officer was the victim. Breonna Taylor, my name wasn't mentioned, her family wasn't interviewed, and her boyfriend was the one that was seen as the perpetrator of a crime. There was no mention of a no-knock warrant and the context around that, right? So everything that you're talking about, I think, is important, especially now that we're in this era of criminal justice reform, even
Yep.
before the uprisings. You could debate, how ambitious those reforms have been or are currently. But this brings me to the question I want to ask is that how does the narrative that's shaped by media impact the public's understanding at a policy level of the things that like sentencing reform, and when we have discussions about bail reform, which people still don't understand, but there's a segment of the population that's really against bail reform when it's basically about poverty. So, how does the coverage seep into narratives that impact the public?
Well, let's talk about two things. One thing is the lack of narrative. There isn't a narrative that actually, at least in the public consciousness, there isn't a narrative that permeates or really combats the narratives that are already set by police, right? So we actually have a lack of counter narratives, and not to say that these counter narratives are not existing. It's not to say that community members are not creating their own platforms, experimenting, becoming innovative, and informing their own communities of what they know is the truth. Those things are happening. The problem is that when you have local TV and local newspapers and local magazines, which all still command a very heavy public presence, they call a lot of attention from the public, especially local TV. They have a very large market share. When those narratives are not being accurately or adequately or consistently mentioned, and really it could be as easy as interviewing a community member on live TV, really. When those narratives are not being presented, then you're going to already have misinformation seep in, right? And this conversation, this lack of narrative really also creates confusion when you have community organizations come out who have been doing this work for decades, say, let's defund the police, let's abolish police. And because that information has not been consistently messaged, and again, because these community members have not been historically kept in the spotlight in media, you're going to have people say, wait, we can't defund police. That doesn't make any sense. There's nothing with what's going to replace that. There's no imagination of what a world could look like without some sort of law and order, right? Mm-hmm. And that impacts the messaging of these types of movements, right? We have history, we have data, and we have information on how policing not only doesn't help keep people safe, but it actually makes municipalities and towns spend a lot more money. We know prisons don't rehabilitate anybody. So why are we having people incarcerated in the first place? And so, but the problem is that information is never presented to the public in a concise and consistent manner. And journalists, like you mentioned, do not do a good job at talking about the root problems. They don't do a good job at giving context. And they don't give a good job at giving nuance. There's a couple of reasons why. One, media is inherently commercial media, nonprofit media. Let's talk about commercial media. Commercial media is inherently a privileged industry. If you work in journalism, if you work in a functioning newsroom, regardless of how you got there, once you get into a newsroom, you still have a position of privilege that community members don't have. And when you have a lot of people from Ivy League schools who are white, who don't accurately or necessarily reflect the communities that they're covering, you're going to have a disconnect of really what these community members are feeling against police and what police are saying about communities as well. So because we have a lack of diversity and a lack of people actually from these communities being able to report on these issues, you're going to have a distortion. When you don't have enough sourcing from these communities that are disproportionately over-policed or in contact with the criminal legal system, you're not going to have that nuance or context in your reporting to give people an understanding of, oh, it's not just police coming in every time that there's a call about gun violence or drugs. It's that this community has been divested in for 10 or 20 years, and there's no resources coming in from the budget that's actually helping support them. Maybe we should talk about policy that affects the budget. Maybe we should talk about policy that affects the police department's budget, et cetera, et cetera. Those conversations aren't happening at a genuine, consistent level in the public space. And because you have this lack of narrative that's not being presented, then these policies are not being implemented. These policies are not being supported. Council members, for example, aren't seeing their communities come out and say, listen, we want this to happen. We need this to happen. And part of the solution is literally moving money from the police department to other resources. And when that narrative is not actually set to the public and the public isn't able to really contextualize what that means, they're not going to get behind these policy measures. They're not going to support council members who say, yes, we need to cut the police department over 10 years. And when you have that lack of information, you get that lack of public support. No policy that is intended to actually address some of these issues gets passed. And that's the way I see it.
Yes, you know, on a lot of this is inside baseball to people that are really familiar with the journalism landscape, but it brings me to like two like real cursory level things. The running joke that the reporter will find, for lack of a better term, the least articulate person on the scene of the crime or the scene of the thing to represent the community in which it happens, right? The running joke is that you're always going to find somebody that, you know, maybe certainly isn't a community activist, certainly isn't a community organizer, certainly isn't at that level where they could be a viable person to speak on whatever might be happening. And they might be there as well, but you're going to find, you know, a local person that has an opinion, and that's good for news, you know, ratings and TV. The other thing, yeah, entertainment, right. And that's the running joke. We all, you know about this. The other thing is that, you know, I was attached to journalism through basically building the websites for a local news organization. One of the things that I would get is when they would bring in the mugshots of the person, the perp who was, you know, caught for the crime. We'd have to put it up and do all these things. And then there would be some stories that I wouldn't get one, or my team wouldn't get one. And we got to put up a generic image. And I'd question this. And invariably, as I learned years ago, I didn't even know this was a thing years ago. It's because they don't give you mugshots when the perpetrator is white. You know, for the most, very simply, that was the answer. And that's just a very base, you know, primal understanding of how the police are trying to control the narrative at every step of the way, whether it's purposeful or just, you know, policy, or it's just how they do.
Yeah, in fact, a local example, which I believe was linked in the Neiman Lab, is the fact that during the when Walter Wallace Jr. was shot and killed by a police officer in West Philly, you know, you had community response and feedback, right? And when there was an uprising happening in West Philly, there was a video that showed a person driving and was surrounded by police, right? And they were just trying to get out. They were literally just trying to turn around and get out. But the video shows police come in, break the window, pull a woman out, pull two kids out. And then the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, shared on their Facebook page one of the children that was taken from this car and said, "Oh, this child was found lost, wandering without shoes on, and our police found him, and you know he's going to have a safe family." But the video shows that the police actually pulled that kid out of the car. And not only that, the officer that was holding the kid was not wearing a mask. But the complete narrative change on how they try to reflect those actions and really the reality of that is just another example. And we have that linked in the Neiman Lab piece. But it's just another example on how police inherently and historically manipulate information. They historically manipulate data. They historically do not like to be held accountable, and historically they do not like to open up their, the peel the onion, so to speak, to be transparent about the works that they're doing. And the problem is that journalists, part of their functions is to hold, you know, departments accountable. It's to find and uproot corruption. It's to show lack of accountability. But the problem is that, and I think someone had mentioned this, is that there's a worry that if you call police for who they are and what they are as a racist institution, you're going to lose your sourcing. You're suddenly not going to have access to this vital information. What information do police offer that's actually vital or informative or helpful to journalists? I think there are certain levels of relationships that are very vital and very important, especially if you're trying to hear about, you know, internal programs or initiatives that are trying to combat racism. I think there's importance to knowing what police are doing, but inherently, what do journalists lose if they don't have a good relationship with police? Because at the end of the day, it's really about fixing the problems that are disproportionately impacting Black and Brown, Indigenous, and other communities of color, and not giving space to an institution that is about incarceration and racism. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's a good 2 cents.
It's just you bring up such fascinating points to me, and again we were talking about earlier, because we've witnessed some of this stuff, you know, and again for me a lot of this comes down to the journalists themselves, right? You can have a journalist that gets the tickets from the cops to the picnic each year, you know, and brings their family. And how are they ever going to go? And maybe they get something
hypothetically
about the precinct of stuff. How are they ever going to, you know, write something against the cops when they're that close, right? Or you could have the journalist, who understands that, you need to keep sources, no matter who the hell they are, at a distance, So it's just, you just raised so many incredible, I mean, we could talk for a long time about this. How do we move sort of some of the points that you bring across into actionable items at newsrooms? I mean, obviously traditional media outlets are going to be extremely protective of how they do things. How do we get this into newsrooms? How do we get journalists thinking this way when they're covering crime?
Yeah, so the things that Mike and I are proposing in the Neiman Lab report, to expand on some of that, there's a lot of common sense policies, literal common sense policies that can be implemented across all newsrooms. In fact, we're seeing some happen now. There's mugshot policies now that we're seeing where they're not, I think a Cleveland newsroom said we're not going to post mugshots anymore. Oh, there's data and research that shows mugshots are actually harmful to Black men. Who would have thought, right? That research has existed for a while. There's also, a right to, there's like a right to remove or something like that. That's also happening in newsrooms where a person who may have been, arrested but not charged, but their mugshot is still there or anything like that says, hey, listen, like I was never charged. This is hurting my, my personal, life, etc. Like I need this to be removed. There are opportunities for that to happen as well. So a right to removal and mugshot policies are the two things that we're starting to branch out. But there's also, and I mentioned this earlier, there's vernacular, right? Style. In my experience, I actually have only worked in two newsrooms, the Washington Post and the Philadelphia Inquirer, that actually had editorial guidelines and standards and a style guide that says, here's how we're going to use certain words and terminology. Here's how we're going to editorially approach specific topics. Here's the rules of engagement that we're going to stand by between our journalists and the community members that we're reaching out to. These are internal newsroom policies that don't exist everywhere consistently. Yes, there's like a code of ethics, right? The Society of Professional Journalists has a code of ethics. And there's all these things that talk a little bit surface level of like how journalists should do their jobs. But when you think about it, when you start to realize there's no internal policy that actually talks about how one should actually, talk to people, especially those that are traumatized and victimized by police and the criminal legal system. There's no guidelines in that. But what we do have is that we have people who are returned citizens. We have organizations that work with reentry that actually knows what this community wants in terms of their coverage. They know the types of language that they want journalists to use when they're talking about people in the reentry space. They know that they have language and types of coverage and information that they know would be informative to families that are impacted by incarceration too. So we're proposing this. We actually, earlier this year, before I left the Philadelphia Inquirer, I had actually written out a policy, an internal policy for our style guide committee that said, hey, the word inmate I think is problematic. And I've talked to 7 different reentry organizations and people who have been incarcerated that have also said that there's data and information that shows the psychology behind using the word felon, inmate, convict is actually marginalizing and triggering and traumatic. And maybe we should not use this harmful word. We don't use the harmful word addict anymore. If you notice that there's very little references of addict in coverage right now, right? That changed because of internal newsroom policy. So if we can actually humanize people who are in any sort of relation with police or the criminal legal system, if we can use human first language and humanize them, maybe we can actually start shifting some of this coverage and shifting some of this narrative too.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think
that's fantastic.
That's something that I think at Newsbeat, as you can see, it's 3 or 4 people working on Newsbeat, but we try our best just to do that ourselves, right? Instead of saying inmates for the question a day, incarcerated populations, it might not be the best thing, but if 3 guys can do it, hosting a podcast, I think a newsroom has the capabilities.
It's simple. And here's the thing, there are organizations that have done really good work at creating guides themselves. It's not like we're conjuring this up.
I'm trying to reinvent the wheel.
These guides, they exist, so it's not that hard to do.
Yeah. So I know we've kept you on in the 10 minutes that I promised you at 7 a.m. this morning.
It's never 10 minutes, bro.
I knew it was not going to be 10 minutes.
It's never 10 minutes
for this.
Okay, yeah, you've been doing this a while. So last question though, and seriously, because I'm just wondering just what kind of reaction you'll be getting. I know on Twitter it could be a sort of an information vacuum. So I don't know if you've been getting people from the other side, especially people who make their lifeblood is crime reporting. What kind of reaction have you gotten? Because you're telling newsrooms to acknowledge. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but you're telling them to acknowledge sort of that they've caused harm over the years, and it's time to resolve that.
Oh yeah. In fact, shout out to the Los Angeles Times for really stepping up and really being public about their racism in their history of their newsroom as well. Newsrooms should apologize first and foremost. In order to change anything, newsrooms, commercial media, TV, broadcast, nonprofit, etc., they need to acknowledge that their coverage historically has been racist. And I think by being able to acknowledge, identify, and hold yourself accountable, your institution accountable, maybe not yourself, maybe you never participated, but your institution as a whole, creating harm and upholding white supremacy over the existence of its time, I think that's a huge thing for newsrooms to start acknowledging publicly and holding themselves accountable for. But for the second thing though, the reaction has actually been really positive. Some people have questioned like, oh, what should we do instead? Like, what do you propose and all that? And it's like, first of all, diversify your sources. That's one thing that you could easily do. Look at your sources and say, wow, I interview a couple like of the same people all the time. You can diversify your sources. But no, really, a lot of the response has been really awesome. A lot of people have just been, quietly or behind the scenes supportive too. They're saying, listen, like, our newsroom is terrible. I've gone through this or X, Y, or Z instance of having to argue with my editor about why we're doing this or this. Yeah. I've heard a lot of people say, and I was guilty about this too, back when I first started, about mugshots, having to still fight for why are we using mugshots in our, why are we making mugshot galleries for clicks? Mm-hmm. That's still happening, folks. Right. People are still creating mugshot galleries because they know that drives web clicks, that drives page views, and that's a metric that newsrooms love to look at, right? If the public wants to know something interesting, is that a lot of the times the homepage of a news website is sometimes informed or influenced by the amount of traffic, online traffic it's getting. Not to say all homepage are displayed because of the level of popularity of certain stories, but there are stories that are actually placed in different places because they're getting a certain amount of news traffic, whether it's a lot of traffic and it's a lot of comments or no traffic at all, and the newsroom is actually trying to promote it. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of conversation of like, how do we change this internally? How do we get our bosses on board? It's really the executive editors. It's really the mid managers that have to really be convinced. A lot of the reporters that have actually been covering this say, yeah, this sucks. Like what we've been doing sucks. A lot of the breaking news reporters too, who have to deal with breaking news, like reporting around police violence and stuff, say, yes, this sucks. I hate having to go this route. But this right. We're forced to do it. It's almost like this. It's almost like the way that Crime Beat has always been done is like almost forced. It's like, oh, we only do it this way, and this is the way it's always been done. But if you take a step back and you think about really the instruments of harm that have been utilized through media, through journalists, and the way that police have utilized journalists and media to perpetuate and support and verify and really protect their own harm and damage that they're doing, we have to take a step back and say, how can we imagine something better? And the only way we can do that, we cannot do that in a vacuum. We can only do that in unison and in alignment with those who are actually been disproportionately impacted by these problems. And that's the first step we have to do. Start listening to people who are impacted by this.
Yeah. Well, one of the first things we have to do is let people like you be listened to, because you drop all the gems, sir.
Here's the thing too, like for me, like for me to be in this position, I really appreciate this platform. I really appreciate the privilege, and I'm only hoping that I can amplify some more people to look into and support, because I'm a carrier of the message, right? But there are people who have been impacted by this specifically that I hope to bring into the spotlight and say, no, focus on them.
We share that same DNA, which is, why we do what we do. Before before we ask you to, just plug yourself, how people can find out more, the shirt, where's that from?
Black Journalists Matter.
I need that. We're gonna have to. Where can we get that? You let us know. We'll support whatever organization is putting that out. That's dope.
Thank you.
I'm less
Yeah,
refined. I'm wearing a Dipset shirt today, so it's a little bit.
Hey, diplomats. Hey, listen.
Come on now.
Shout out.
You know what it is.
So
Yeah, go ahead, Rashad.
yeah, definitely. No, I do want so people can continue the sort of the conversation with you. Where can they find you on social media, just to keep this alive?
Yeah, unfortunately, for better or worse, you can find me anywhere on Google. So if you type in my name, TAU, dog, last name Chappell, like Dave Chappelle without the E, you'll find me. I'm mostly on Twitter ranting. I'm mostly on Instagram. If you follow me on Instagram, I'm big into cannabis advocacy and legalization. So you're going to see a lot of cannabis news on Instagram. You'll see a little bit of cannabis news, but a lot more journalism, crime reporting on Twitter. So 2 different types of things. But
all good. Hey, listen, we might have to have you back to talk about that.
Listen, if you want to talk about cannabis, listen.
We will. That's 100%. We're
Well,
all right up that alley.
Yeah, we've had conversations on that in earlier episodes, and we definitely plan on continuing it. So look forward for me reaching out to you again in the near future.
Hey, one question before you go. I'm a Jersey guy now. What you said, you guys are set up in Jersey, Free Press. Where are you?
Oh yeah, so we have a project that focuses specifically on like the entire state of Jersey. I think we have like 3 or 4 different cities. I'm currently based in Camden County though. Shout out to the 856 area code.
All right. I'm up in Brick City, North New Jersey in the house, man. So
cool.
That's what's up. I'd like to follow up more with the kind of the local area, see if there's anything any synergy there. So
I can connect you with one of our friends working in New Jersey as well.
Right on. All right. Thank you for your time, brother. I appreciate it, man. It was
great.
dope.
Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on, and look forward for us contacting you again in the future. Keep up the
Definitely.
great work.
Thank you all. Be safe and be well.
All right. Right on.
Take care.
There it is. Tauhid Chappell, program manager for News Voices, Philadelphia at Free Press. What an illuminating conversation.
I don't think we've had a scheduled interview go that long because it was just such an engaging conversation, and there's just so many different layers that you could peel back.
Yeah, and also this is our thing. We're journalists. This is our thing, and this is very important to us, and it's important to anyone watching and listening to us. This is the heart of it all. How you present the information matters.
Yeah, it's even the little things. It's just like he said, just the vernacular around it. When we did an episode on felony disenfranchisement, we didn't want to say, people with felon, like we didn't want to say felons every time we referenced it, right? We want to say, people with felony convictions, because even just the slightest change in wording like that has serious implications.
Right. They're people. They're not labels, or as Genesis B would say, people, not things. Yeah. People, not things.
I mean, there's so much to this, and as we said, I mean, we could talk with him for hours about this.
Indeed.
Prior to what comes to my mind, we were talking about just in preparation of him coming on, just some of the crime stories we covered, Rashad. And what came to mind for me personally, back in the day, there was this big story on Long Island, and in his report here, he talks about sort of that thrill and that drive to get the sexy or the bloody story. If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
Say, and there was this dog that was killed out here on Long Island, and somebody had set it on fire, and every single news outlet in the entire region came out here to cover this dog that got set on fire.
Sure.
And
which is fair. That's a terrible thing. Should be covered.
And I think it was Timothy Bolger went with me, our crime guy at the time. We went out there and we knocked on doors, and one of the first doors we knocked on, I said, you were all out here asking about the goddamn dog, but what about the dude that was bludgeoned to death about a week earlier? And then, but it was an immigrant. Never read about it. What do we do? Obviously, that became the story.
Right.
And it was just so, we
covered the lack of coverage because it's, again, very pick and choose.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that, the reward for information about the freaking dog was like 3 times what the reward for, this unsolved murder that no one had looked into. And I remember going to a press conference, and you learn these tips, and, we could talk to him about it too. One of the tips that we learned along the way is, you wait out the press conference and you wait for the PACs to leave. And that's really where that's when you get the meat of the story. And so we waited them out, and basically the county executive at the time had contaminated potential evidence in a murder crime by taking this baton that was found and what he thought was and waving it around. It wasn't even in a bag. And at the same time, you have somebody who was bludgeoned to death. So, I can't say that was the exact murder weapon, but wouldn't you at least test that?
Right.
When there's an unsolved murder in the same. So, I mean, again, we could go on and on, but it's just.
I just want to say, to your point, Chris, Jed's comment, Jed Morey made a comment on it's a long comment, and we don't have a lot of screen space, Jed. So maybe think Twitter-ish next time. But we love you, sir. If you read Seymour Hersh's autobiography, he wrote about the first big potential homicide, cover story break, working overnight crime beat. The story was ready to run. Then the desk editor asked what color the victim was. It hadn't occurred to Hirsch to put it in the story. When the editor found out it was a black family, they killed the story because it didn't matter. And again, it's these narratives that get told through the media. And I just wanted to give Jed's comments some shine to the people who might be listening instead of watching.
Yeah, but also that, these journalists are there for generations, right? Some of these reporters stay with these newspapers forever. It becomes ingrained in sort of the editorial coverage throughout the years. And I'm interested just to see. I asked him about the reaction because I do want to see what's going to happen over the next weeks and months. Not to say newsrooms are going to make these substantial changes because two people wrote an op-ed in Neiman Lab. But,
sure.
I'm
gonna put that on the screen again just so people see it.
You can't. In one hand, you can't be a news organization that's in a way you're supporting Black Lives Matter and you're equality and racial justice, and then on the other hand, you can't engage in self-reflection.
Right.
You need to do both.
I got to tell you, on the episode we did just recently, the collaboration with Color of Change, which is our current episode on the Newsbeat podcast feed. Once again, for those watching, and we appreciate you for watching, we're actually a podcast. We're not YouTubers. You could press that subscribe button, smash that like button, but we're not actually YouTubers. We have a podcast, and it's really phenomenal and award-winning, and it's social justice-oriented, just like we're doing here, but we have music, and it's very expertly crafted and collaged together, according to the Bellow Collective. Shouts to that compliment. But the fact is, we did an episode called America's Reckoning. Is a change going to come? Talking about this summer of revolution in some ways. And Alex Vitale, who was one of the guests on the show, really, it's something that stuck with me the whole time. It was just such a gem. And he was like, it doesn't matter if your process and protocol is fair and balanced. If your protocol is fair, but your foundation is racist or inherently, implicitly biased, you could follow all the right, procedures. But in itself, it's still a racist policy. It's still a biased or prejudicial policy. That's what this kind of reminds me of what you said. Newsroom people that say, newsrooms that say, we support, we do a full page, ad, Black Lives Matter, or we're putting, social justice issues at the forefront, but they're still doing mugshots or they're still doing something else that they may not be aware, forgive them, editors, for they know not what they do. But maybe they ought to. And I think that's why this initiative is so important. It's such a brilliant initiative.
Yeah. Look, I mentioned bail reform because every time I just read like a typical crime beat story where they mention this person got, $40,000 of bail, it's just a line that's always just thrown in there, and people still don't understand the implications of it, the collateral consequences of bail. There's just no context. And then when bail reform comes up as a policy discussion, people are vehemently against it because they think there's going to be a wave of violent people hitting the streets, going to break into their homes.
Tauhid made a guest today. Tauhid Chappell made a great point. Like you said, tied into that is that people don't really understand the defund the police movement, the idea of defunding the police, because the messaging has been bad. And I agree with that. But they also, because unless you like go again, it's never the leading story on the cable news. You might get it, at the 40-minute mark on CNN's Cuomo Live, where you're gonna have someone, Angela Rye might be on talking about and breaking it down, and then you could, I get what you're talking. I see, why this is such a polarizing thing. They go a little bit inside baseball. You find out what they really mean. You get a little bit of details, but you're not going to find that on your 10 o'clock news, on your local, especially on what is it, Spectrum, or what is it, Sinclair, on your Sinclair media station.
Sinclair.
No, you're not. So listen, it's a really fascinating topic, and it just, again, it gives you an idea, as consumers of news, as consumers of social media, y'all might not really recognize what's happening and what you're being fed, because, we think of the news as being, generally, I like to say we used to think this, more like impartial, but there are narratives at work. There are sources in police, law enforcement that are feeding. And if the only information you can get about something that happened is from law enforcement, you really got to say it's journalism 101, as the Neiman Lab article op-ed says. It's journalism 101 to not question several sources, to not get the full story before you present it. And in these crime, like you say, if it bleeds, it leads, these quick, let's get on news at, live video at 10, whatever. They're not giving that depth. And so you only get generally one side of the story.
Yeah. The last thing I'm just going to leave it with this, because I know we've gone long on this one topic.
It's a great topic.
But look, I don't really blame, I think, some crime beat reporters might, see this article and think that they're the ones being attacked, when we're not trying to blame them, because look, their editors are telling them to run out and get the story, get this soundbite, and come back, because it's a race to the finish line, right? Who's going to get the story up there first? Right. And we don't need to add all the context now. We can do it later. That's why at the bottom we put, this is a developing story.
100%.
The chances are people are only going to read that one developing story. They're
not going to come back. You mean they're not going to? I want to find out what happened. Later.
Yeah, they're not going to come back for it. So this really is from a top to bottom kind of change that needs to happen. I don't expect it to happen right away, but it's just little things like the vernacular and everything that we've already discussed that are just easy decisions to make for newsrooms.
Got it.
And it's, as he said too, I mean, the feedback he's gotten so far from the journalists, at least, it's very positive. They want it. A true journalist, they want to tell a complete story.
It's like, he said, anyone would be like, well, then what are we going to cover? Well, cover the same thing, just cover it better. And I'm sure the journalists all want to do that at a greater depth. So great talk. Great conversation. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you what you think about this whole thing? Please, we are willing and able to share your thoughts. We just don't want to be lecturers. We want you to be engaged and informed and participatory in This Week in Social Justice. We are here. What should we do, guys, while we wrap up, I guess, the last show of the year? I do want to play a clip. Can we play a clip from the Reckoning episode? Should we do that? We mentioned it a few minutes ago. Folks, if you're finding us through video, you for rocking with us. We are a very, very fabulous, if I may say so myself, podcast, and we go into these kinds of things with great detail, but in such a compelling manner, because we mix it with music, we mix it with original hip hop lyrics. And again, this is our current episode. You'll find it on the news feed, on the podcast feed, Newsbeat, wherever you find podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts. Look for Newsbeats, 2 words. One love. And check out America's Reckoning is a Change Gonna Come, which does look back at this summer of revolution, of protests amid the coronavirus, the Black Lives Matter being painted in the streets, all the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, all the things that happened, and what actually has come out of that. Could this year's events have actually sparked a real change? And there is some evidence to show that. And I got to say, we didn't mention it in the episode, the topic we're talking about today, the fact that newsrooms are considering changing language. Do we talk inmates? Do we call them convicts, or do we call them incarcerated people? Just that little change. That's in part. That's part of this whole same thing. So this year was a hell of a decade, and this is a part of it. This is a clip from our current podcast episode. America's Reckoning is a Change Gonna Come.
This cannot be a one-time thing. We cannot continue to allow the people to oppress African American community. They don't invest in us. They don't show us the resources. You are convincing, not me. I can't talk to your parents. I can't talk to your grandparents. At some point, you gotta be the voice for the black people in your household. And it has to start today. It was 9 minutes. That officer set his knee on George's neck. You think they gave us 3 officers? They still walking the street, still walking today. It's time for us to put aside all of these things that's going on and to love on each other and to show each other, I won't let you fall and don't let me fall. As long as I got you, you got me. And we gotta stand back.
All we got is us. No justice, peace, sleep, or days off. No cakewalks, no stars, bars, or fake laws. Snake oils, kumbayas, and stage songs. No A-Rod in this friendly game of baseball. Snake guys set it off, singing they had won when looking at the front door. But your partner is your main source. Same cloth, thin blue, same story, same issue. Puxatawny Phil film debut. Deja vu, flashbacks of Staten after the chanting. We were standing in the wind holding a candle. If that's not an example of how fragile and how futile it can feel, I don't know what is. Or if justice can be real, but I believe it can. Indeed, thought, prayer, and action. Sure as the sun rises, as sure as Black Lives Matter. A fact that some would rather shout over than hear. So the shoulder we hear and running over the fear.
Yes, indeed. One time, Silent Night, our artist in residence, crafting and delivering compelling lyrical contributions originally written for each episode. It's the beat and news beat. It's why we're an award-winning podcast. Takes the issues and just delivers them in the voice of rebellion, hip hop. Right? That's how it's supposed to be done. That is real protest music coming from the Newsbeat factory. So we do thank you for listening and for shouts to the Color of Change, the juggernaut social justice platform in collaboration with us. So on that episode, you'll hear from their president, Rashad Robinson, their VP and director of campaigns, Arisha Hatch, who's fabulous, as well as
Lucio Miaga.
Alicia Omiaga from
Alex Vitale, who you
Minnesota, Black Visions. Is that and Alex Vitale. Just amazing experts, people who are fighting the good fight. You got to go deep on some places to find voices like this. These are preeminent leaders and activists in the field. Newsbeat brings them to you, and we make it sound good, man. We make it sound good. Shouts to Reagan. Shouts to Summer. By far the best podcast I've ever listened to. Y'all get it right every time. You get comments right every time, Summer. So there you go. Thank you for that. And we thank y'all all for checking and rocking with us in 2020. We had some great episodes this year. We learned a bunch of things. This year, like I said, is a hell of a decade. But because of the issues that we talked about in this episode, social justice may be, something that continues to be a bubbling, important, everyday topic for Americans that maybe weren't engaged in those conversations or weren't engaged in those issues before these unfortunate events. And hopefully that does lead to the change that we talked about in the episode.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not surprised that our last stream of 2020 is the one that goes long.
This is great.
2020 has been a hell of a decade.
It's a hell of a decade. Listen, we had some other things to talk about. Let's run through them real quick, very, very quickly, to who might be catching us or tuning in later. This day in history, let's do it. I don't care, guys. Let's just run through it. Let people know what they need to know. This would be Newsbeat. It doesn't say it, but it really should. It's news being the past. Real quick, go.
This day in history, 1865. No, I'm just sorry.
Let's go. People don't know this stuff.
This day in history in 1865, 13th Amendment was certified, abolishing slavery unless you were convicted of a crime. And it continues servitude to this day. There's an amendment on the, sorry.
I know. We thought we were going to skip it. A resolution.
You wanted him to do 1.5 podcasts speed, which is not easy.
Live pressing one and a half. That's funny.
There's a movement to amend it, and
Of course.
it's important that gets done.
Absolutely. Forced prison labor. Do watch if you have not, and it, as we all know, it should be required watching in anywhere in the world, any educational setting, especially 13th, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Do check that out. So there's a movement to try to eradicate it. We don't know if it'll happen. These resolutions aren't like bills to be passed, but hopefully there'll be some movement on it. It's a terrible thing.
You
Rashed,
cannot amend the Constitution. I mean, come on.
isn't that crazy? Like the idea of amending the Constitution today is like thrown out there, unless it's something far right and radical, then they're all for it. But the general idea of amending the Constitution to actually right some wrongs sounds so foreign to people when there's literally been how many amendments to the Constitution?
We're literally talking about amendments.
Right, it's an amendment. It's just
amendment. So
like change the amend the amendment. It's not like we're trying to know the Constitution. Shut up.
No, it breaks some people's brains.
Well, like we said, things that should be taught in the education system, but there's not a very good education system. Anyway, go ahead. Are we at the future? Was that it? Was that the past?
So we're in the future.
Go.
The future.
Chop.
Okay, so people I think have been paying attention to this, but just want to put a little more focus on the eviction crisis that's about to happen. We're all happy celebrating the holidays and the new year, but it's going to be a horrific time for millions of Americans once the calendar switches to 2021. There's millions of people at risk of being evicted, and there's millions of people who owe substantial amounts of back rent, which I think the average is around $5,500 per American, and the measly, sorry for editorializing, but the measly bailout package that they're discussing right now is going to do little to help the people who have suffered through the pandemic through no fault of their own. They lost their jobs and are unable to afford rent. So it's going to create just another consequence of COVID-19 and the inaction from lawmakers in this country.
As unfortunate as it is, wow. I'm looking at the Vox link that you shared. It's on the screen.
Yeah, there was a study done a couple of months ago, I think, and it just really got some attention. But it's hard research to do because it's hard to find
a correlation
tally and a correlation. But yeah, as you can see on the screen, if you're watching that, the evictions during the summer, I think, led to 11,000 extra COVID deaths because people were forced out of their homes and into unsafe conditions. So that's just enough. Beyond going broke and falling into poverty, there's people dying because of evictions.
Yeah, indeed. Well, again, the things you don't normally see talked about as much as you should. COVID's effect on the incarcerated population, COVID's effect on, because of evictions, because of the people being forced into poverty. You hear about it and then it's moved on. We try to bring these things to light, point you in some direction so that you can spend the rest of your enjoyable holiday season reading about people who are not doing perhaps as well as you and finding ways to help contribute to solving those problems in the year ahead. I think the episode that personified all of this year was our When Epidemics Collide episode. And I think we should encourage people to check that out. The ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic are a lot more than what you hear about, whether it's, yes, some people lost their jobs. Yes, some restaurants had to close. Yes, people are, losing their, unable to pay rent. There's some monetary things. It goes way deeper than that. Unnecessary lives have been lost and will be continued to be lost. So that if lawmakers, as you say, measly responses, let us hope that regardless of what side of the political aisle you might lean, that things get better than they are one way or the other. Incoming administration, outgoing administration, whatever. We just need better things to happen. Here's a clip from our episode, When Epidemics Collide, and we'll be back to say goodbye for the year.
What we're seeing with this coronavirus is that it's tearing off the blinds of the inequality that was at the center and core of our society. The 140 million people who are poor or one $400 emergency away from poverty. The 15 million families who can't afford water. Hundreds of cities and towns and states across the country. The 10 million to 12 million to a lot more million people who are homeless, despite the fact that there's actually more abandoned housing in this country than homeless people.
Tonight, they're the images alarming Californians. In LA, the homeless on places like the Hollywood Walk of Fame and along the iconic Venice Boardwalk.
Any and everywhere you go, in and out of stores, homeless.
What was once largely confined to the city's notorious Skid Row can now be seen all across Los Angeles. Hundreds of homeless encampments have sprung up, including this one in the shadow of City Hall.
The tens of millions of people without health care at all, and then the tens of millions more people on top of that who do have health care, but who can't afford the coverage that they have. The lack of living wages, the 60.
It goes on and on. Just a taste of how we put these shows together. I learned so much doing them. We make them sound funky, but it's also heartbreaking, but necessary. And I thank you guys as we wrap up the year and wrap up this show. Once again, for the opportunity to work with you. There are no finer journalists on the planet. Thanks to Jed Morey, our executive producer, and Morey Creative Studios, digital marketing agency that does fabulous work on the marketing side of things, but also some of the team members there help us with our show. Shouts to Sage, shouts to Jeff Main, shouts to John Shim, shouts to John Sala, and everybody there as well who lets us help tell these stories, do these shows. And yeah, it's been a hell of a decade this year. And I'm just glad we're able to tell these stories and do this work and try to, as we always try to do, influence people in a positive way to find ways to help, to change, to learn about these issues, to learn about the people who are fighting against these injustices so that you can join the fight. One thing that happened this year is that a lot of people said, enough. I see now. I see now. I didn't quite get it. It took something as horrific as George Floyd and some of the things afterwards for us to really see it. And as I like to tell people, or as I like to just remind in general, when you're a victim of those injustices, when you're in those oppressed or marginalized communities, you can't just one day think about it, you know, I'm with you, I support you, I stand in solidarity, and then go about your life. There are no days off when you're a victim of these injustices from these communities, for the victims that we talk about, the people that we share their stories on this show and on Newsbeat. There's no days off. You don't get a day off from being Black in America. You don't get a day off from being poor in America. So if these things touched you earlier this summer and you wanted to do something, you did something, you found out more information, you donated, you protested, you did something, the fight ain't over.
Yeah, that's the exact sentiment that was echoed in that clip from Reckoning that we played. That I wish we knew the gentleman's name who was sort of given that the impromptu speech.
Yeah, we'll track that down.
In the streets during a protest. But yeah, he's basically saying the same thing. It's not a one-day thing for us. You need to go home and talk to your family and talk to people about these issues because it continues.
That's it. So we are here to continue to bring the issues to light, curate them, if you will, be, kind of cool and bantery, and plus put out the Newsbeat podcast, which is super infotainment, edutainment, to quote KRS-One. We always mix it up with hip hop. That's our thing. But again, the finest journalists in the land, bringing you the stories and the finest guests, including Tauhid Chappell today, Free Press. Do follow more of that movement. If you're just catching us now, wow, what a conversation about how the media needs to change how they cover crime in America. Great, fascinating conversation. Catch it on the rewind. If you're just figuring out that we're doing this, we'll be back at the top of the year. We're going to skip the last 2 Fridays of the year because it coincides with the holidays. We'll be back at the top of the year. I assume we're going to keep doing this. I haven't even actually, I'm announcing this without conferring with my colleagues here, but we'll probably keep doing this. And if not, you'll write us many, many comments saying how much you miss us and you need us to come back. We'll probably be in the same bat time, same bat channel next year, but stick close. Follow us on Newsbeat Podcast, wherever you find podcasts, and you'll be able to really keep up with our core work. And you can find us on wherever you're checking us now. Just keep checking us. And we appreciate your love and support. And we appreciate your hate. If you hate us, that's great. We love you too. Gentlemen, any final words?
I do not second that comment.
Oh, no, I love my haters.
I just want to put it out there.
Love my haters. But I don't know how many we have because we're doing good things. But anyway, I'm in Georgia. I better keep my voice down. You never know. I don't know where I am in Georgia, so you gotta be careful. But yeah, reporting to you live from the Peach State. I'll be checking out some of the local activities and reporting you back. But I'm gonna take it out for the rest of the year and kind of laid back and plan for next year. Gentlemen, any last words for the year?
Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Use the episodes we did as guides to learn about these issues and get involved.
That's it.
Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll see you in 2021.
God willing. You'll find us on all the social media platforms, US Newsbeat. Please interact with us. Let us know what you think. Ideas for future episodes, compliments. I'm really good at accepting compliments. You find me personally on Twitter at Manny Faces. These guys are more laid back. They don't crave the attention like I do. You'll also find some of the things that I do wherever you find Manny Faces online. So there's some things we do. But that's it. We'll be back next year, I guess.
Yeah. Cross our fingers. I mean, more than one way.
Next year's going to be interesting.
Physically and in front of a webcam.
We ain't done yet. There's gonna, what it is, and I've always said this. It's the type of work I wish we didn't have to do because we're talking about injustices. I suspect there's gonna still be injustice in 2021. So we'll be here to talk about it until there is no more off the face of the earth. Once again, shouts to Maury Creative Studios, Jed Maury, the whole family there. Shouts to you, everyone who's listening and watching. We love you. We thank you very much for giving us this platform. We do not have the reach to pull the ears of the world like some of the other platforms, but we're good, and we're here for you, and you will be here for us in 2021. Catch you later. My name is Manny Faces. On behalf of Rashed Mian, managing editor, Christopher Tawarski, our editor-in-chief, and our grand poobah, Jed Maury, executive producer, we thank you for rocking with Newsbeat. Catch you on the return flight. Thank you, y'all. Peace and love.